A couple weeks ago, I received a mailbag question asking what my ideal X-Men in the MCU would be. I gave a very quick answer regarding what teammates I would like to see in the first X-Men MCU movie, but I felt like the question really opened up the opportunity to talk about what exactly I would want to see with the MCU introducing X-Men in the future. So that will be the topic of discussion in today's video: the MCU and how I think they should handle the introduction of the X-Men. If you grew up in the late 90s and early 2000s like myself, your earliest memories of the Marvel Universe probably came with the Fox Marvel series. I personally watched the 90s Spider-Man animated series religiously. That show acted not only as my introduction to Spider-Man and all of the characters in his storylines, but also the larger Marvel Universe as a whole. I had a tape of the Secret Wars arc that I would rewatch consistently. It was just mind-blowing that in one show we would get Spider-Man, the Fantastic Four, the X-Men, and some of the Avengers all together. So when the live-action movies started releasing, it was always really confusing to me as a kid why these characters never met up with each other. It was the coolest thing when it happened in animation, and I couldn't wait to see it happen on the big screen. Of course, as I got older, I started reading the comics and learning about the film rights involving each of the characters, and it always seemed like the big crossover I always dreamed of would never happen, especially when Fox was trying to kickstart their own shared universe of Marvel characters, and Sony was unsuccessfully trying to get the same thing off the ground with Spider-Man characters. But it's 2025. Disney and Marvel have the rights to all of the Marvel characters once again, except for Spider-Man, which they are sharing with Sony. And after Deadpool and Wolverine and seeing the cast list for Avengers Doomsday, the crossover I had always dreamed of looks more likely than ever. But the MCU has a really difficult task ahead if they're going to be adapting the mutant part of the Marvel Universe in a meaningful way. After the Infinity Saga and Disney fully acquiring 20th Century Fox, it seemed like the idea that they were going with was that since the beginning mutants had existed in the MCU, and more of them would gradually turn up as the Multiverse Saga continued. We saw Ursa Major, a lesser known mutant from the comics, appear in Black Widow, and then later receive confirmation that he's a mutant in the MCU as well, followed by Kamala Khan's abilities being referred to as a mutation, and receiving confirmation that Namor in the MCU is also a mutant. This led many to speculate that maybe Professor Xavier and Magneto already exist in the MCU. We just haven't heard about them yet because the knowledge of mutants isn't widespread, and that would be something they deal with in the coming phases and the introduction of the X-Men. But after the Marvel's post-credit scene, Deadpool and Wolverine being a massive success, and now Avengers Doomsday bringing back most of the Fox X-Men cast, it seems like the future of the MCU is to be kind of a hybrid between the Fox X-Men universe and the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I think there are some upsides and downsides to this. For the upsides, I think it would have been really hard for the MCU to build up a mutant-based storyline 20 years after the beginning of the MCU and the age of superheroes. In the canon of Marvel Comics, the mutants emerge right around the same time as the age of superheroes begins. When looking at the chronology, Captain America existed in the 40s, disappeared for 20 years, and during the early 60s we saw the emergence of the Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, some of the main players for the Avengers, and ultimately the X-Men. Now, Stan Lee has credited the creation of mutants in the Marvel Universe as more of a source of convenience initially. He was creating so many characters with magical or convoluted scientific origins, it was just easier to say that they were born that way, and that helped in developing what the mutants of the Marvel Universe would come to stand for. The X-Men were a group of teenagers initially, so mutation formed as an allegory of puberty. Add into that the fact that the X-Men were releasing during the civil rights movement. Mutants would face a certain prejudice that other characters in the Marvel Universe wouldn't receive. Characters like the Fantastic Four were embraced by the public as cosmic celebrities. They were an anomaly that served to protect the Earth, and the same could be said about the Avengers. But mutants introduced a completely different angle to this. The fact that somebody could be super strong, read your mind, walk through walls weren't easily identifiable by a colorful costume. Now let's look at the MCU. Looking at the the MCU timeline, I'd say the age of superheroes begins with Tony Stark telling everybody he is Iron Man in 2008. 8 years later, the Sokovia Accords are introduced, which is the first point in the MCU where the politics of the world try and influence the superhumans. The themes of people being afraid or hating superheroes kind of carry over into WandaVision and Spider-Man No Way Home with programs like Damage Control, but ultimately the MCU as a whole has pretty much embraced the idea of superhumans existing in this world, and it's been that way for nearly 20 years. So my main concern with introducing mutants in the MCU is how do you reapply prejudice to something that's been ongoing for 20 years, where in the comic universe all of these heroes emerged roughly around the same time, and it's such a fundamental part about the identity of the X-Men that it's something that shouldn't be swept under the rug, making the introduction of mutants at this point of the timeline in the MCU just extremely difficult. So now we have the Multiverse Saga. We know that the X-Men from the prior Fox universe are going to be interacting with the Avengers in Doomsday. Now I see two possible opportunities for how they could handle the transition of bringing the mutants from that universe into the MCU. One opportunity is to canonize the events of the X-Men movies that we had seen previously, and have this retcon where both of them were existing simultaneously. And this would kind of work like the Spider-Man Brand New Day comic storyline, where people would have memories of like, oh yeah, the X-Men were probably at the Battle for Earth during Avengers Endgame, but I do understand how convoluted that could be for general audience members, and possibly very frustrating for fans who would have wanted to see the X-Men interact with the Avengers during that time period. But the other opportunity I see is that the MCU gets its own soft reboot. This would result in the Fox X-Men universe dying completely. The only carryover I could see is maybe Hugh Jackman's Wolverine and Ryan Reynolds' Deadpool. And then the major MCU retcon is that the coming of mutants happened over the course of 20 years in the MCU, allowing the Marvel Cinematic Universe to finally recast many of the most popular X-Men that we had seen in the Fox X-Men universe. Now I do think this is a long shot because for better or for worse, people really love the original cast of those X-Men movies. As much as I like some of the young renditions of the X-Men cast, I don't know how you get more perfect than Patrick Stewart as Charles Xavier. But that's exactly the problem with recasting the X-Men. We had what was considered pitch perfect casting for so many of those characters that fans are gonna have a very hard time accepting anybody else in that role. And I understand the argument that First Class and the later movies in the X-Men timeline had already recasted some of those characters, but those aren't really recasting in my opinion. Those are just young versions of those characters. With all that being said though, we won't really have a good idea of what Marvel's plan for the X-Men will be until after Doomsday. I do really want to know what their possibilities are for telling a very compelling mutant-based story in the MCU though. In a perfect world, the MCU would have started when all of these characters were under one umbrella, but I have to give the MCU credit for making it work with what they had. That's gonna do it for this video though. Let me know what you think about this down in the comments below, and I'm really curious what everybody else's ideas are on how the MCU can introduce mutants. Do you have an idea that maybe I didn't talk about? Would you like to see the X-Men universe continue on its own separate from the MCU? Let me know in the comments down below, but again, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.